Are we?
So exciting.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the inaugural PodFest Asia. And for the first time ever, my first ever speaker, let's welcome Heather Osgood to the program. How are you?
I am great. Am I your first speaker to the event?
Yeah. And
my goodness. I feel so excited.
It's so fitting, right? Because I remember, way back, I think even before the pandemic, you were probably the first non-CMO guest. But obviously, you are the founder of your true, media agency, right? So, True Native Media, I'm sorry. And at the time, I was still completely clueless about ad tech, about advertising, about podcasting, really a very superficial level of understanding. But ever since you came onto the podcast, my life has changed. Can you hear me, by the way? Seems to be frozen. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?
Hello. Uh-oh. Am I freezing? I don't know. You froze on me. Maybe I froze on you. I'm not sure which, but.
Okay. Better now? So just to show everyone, who is tuning in, right, that this is absolutely live. So there might be some hiccups or, I don't know, frozen images along the way, but that's part of live streaming, right?
That is part of live streaming. Yes, absolutely. I closed out of everything. So hopefully that will not be an issue. We will see. But yeah, I'm excited to chat with everyone.
Yeah, and it's been how many months since we last seen each other, in a virtual space like this?
Oh, I would say, I mean, probably at least 6 months, maybe more.
6 months or more, right? And so many things have happened, during this short span of, I think since March or either April. So it's about 8 to 7 months down the road, right? What has changed and what have you been up to all these months since? Am I still frozen on you again? Can you hear me? Whoops. Heather, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
What happened?
Yeah, we're definitely freezing here. That is not good.
Is it really? Yeah.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
All right, I can hear you. Yeah, but yeah, we're both freezing, unfortunately. So I can try to switch to my hotspot and see if that helps. Would you like me to try that?
Maybe try that, yes. I know there's in the earlier live stream as well for your industry review, right, with Evo Terra. There was some frozen situations as well.
Yes.
So it could be due to Wi-Fi issues. You might want to change your network to something faster speed. I don't know. Yeah.
I know. Yeah, it's definitely, it hasn't been my friend today. So let's see here. If I might lose you, but I'll come right back.
Sure. Okay. You may exit the studio and come back in anytime when you're ready. Okay. So meanwhile, I'll just keep talking and let everybody know what's going on in this event. And of course, you could probably see from the background and also the logo on top, it's a departure from what I used to do when I live stream. Normally, it's the CMO Asia podcast, which is my content pillar, where I have a bunch of superb CMOs who come onto the shows. And occasionally, great guests like Heather, who was on the program, I think back in March or April, where she really, threw so many wisdoms in terms of, knowledge about podcast advertising, in terms of how to monetize a podcast, making a podcast profitable. So it basically changed my perspective of podcasting because at the time, I was doing podcasting more as someone who is doing it, just to see more action. At the same time, I was able to bring, some modest income by just helping some of my partners or brands or clients to generate leads through my podcast. So that's something that I probably will share during the duration of this entire festival as well, when I speak to more podcasters about how they monetize their podcast. So back to Heather. Are you back?
I am back. I apologize for the interruption. So hopefully we fix the problem.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful to see you back again. So let's maybe dive into the first topic that we're gonna cover today, which is basically about the podcast advertising playbook, which is a podcast that you basically roll out the episodes that drop a lot of value bombs for podcasters and everyone who is in the advertising industry, especially. And I think CMOs also tune into your podcast, right? So tell us more about your show.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started the podcast advertising playbook. It's been a little while ago now, but I've gotten more consistent in publishing the show, I would say, in about the last 8 to 6 months. And essentially, I created the podcast specifically to talk about what I do, which is podcast advertising and how important podcast advertising is. So the concept of the podcast advertising playbook is every episode is telling people a different bit of advice on how they can execute podcast advertising, how they can find, what it is that they're looking for in terms of trying to create a good, successful campaign. The industry is just growing so rapidly and so many things change so quickly. So the concept behind the show is just creating an environment where people can really get the information they need about podcast advertising.
That's a fantastic introduction, and I think it's probably one of my most played podcasts. And usually, it's becoming like a routine. Every time when you drop a new episode, I'll be probably the first from Asia to check it out.
Oh,
because
thanks,
there's so
Wayne.
much value out of it, and of course, it's just one of your vehicle, right, to communicate to your audience. And you do have a really incredible company that you founded. I think it's called True Native Media. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
So maybe
nope.
tell our audience again. Exactly, how do you describe it to someone, who basically haven't heard of your company before, especially in this part of the world in Asia?
Yeah, absolutely. So True Native Media is a podcast representation firm. And what we do is we work with podcasts and we connect them with the advertisers. So right now we've got about 70 different podcasts that we work with. And our whole job, we don't do any production. We don't do any promotion. We just do ad sales. So we get advertisers for the podcasts that we represent. And I would think you probably have similar companies in Asia, although to be honest, I haven't heard of many.
That's true. And I think there's another person who's coming on to this PodFest Asia event later on. She's doing something similar, but maybe in terms of the wide breadth of scope that you're able to deliver to your customers is probably quite breathtaking. I think most CMOs will probably like to check out your agency as well. And there was this maybe a mention in this Podscape super graphic that Bryan Barletta and I think the Magellan AI people responsible for generating this incredible graphic, right, for us to reference to. And I saw that your logo, your company logo, is placed under, I think, agency. Am I right to say that? Let's maybe take a look at that graphic.
Yeah, it's. I think that they have it under representation firm. Let's see. Yeah, they call them rep firms, and I would say that's how I would classify us, as a representation firm.
Okay, and I think earlier on in your industry review for 2020, I think you dive into this graphic and correctly pointed out, that this is probably a landscape, or should we say, a podscape that's gonna change dramatically in the next few months or even years that follow, right? And right now we are seeing maybe just a handful of companies being represented, but just like Scott Brinker's MarTech landscape super graphic, he has grown from just a beginning of just a couple of hundreds to now 8,000 and counting, right? So this is probably going to change in the months to come. So what are your hot take in terms of being placed under rep firms? Is that an area where you are most active in right now? And do you see your company actually expanding into other services as well to actually provide services and for this ever-growing demand from your clientele base?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say yes. I think we are placed correctly in the representation segment. And really, it's because while other companies do sell ads, a lot of times that's not the main focus of their business. So the main focus might be to produce podcasts, to promote podcasts. There's also all of the tech companies out there that are really trying to create, a platform, whether it's hosting or whether it's integration. Really, our focus is just on the ad sales piece. So I think that we are placed appropriately. And as we see the industry grow, it's entirely possible that we may offer new services. But at this point, and truthfully, I was kind of happy to see that there were 14 companies listed as rep firms, and we were one of them. So it's not as though that particular segment is so overrun that we need to look for other services to offer. My goal is to just continue to perfect our rep firm services and really dial in on that host-read endorsement ad, which is the important, I feel, backbone of the podcast industry.
So one of the things that really excites me, when I saw this being shared on social media just a couple of days ago, if I remember correctly, is that it's a very large community. It's like when I look at company logos, right? The first thing that really warms my heart is that there are a huge number of people who are behind all these awesome companies, and we don't really feel lonely, in terms of like our presence in this industry, right? Maybe like for our location in Asia, where there are not many podcasters yet, definitely not as many as you can find in US, right? So it's like, it's probably a very lonely journey for podcasters and those who are in different, parts of the machinery where they are doing similar things like, being representing firms or just providing services to advertisers and CMOs, for example, to actually match them with the right podcast to do their activation, for example. So do you feel that it warms your heart as well when you see that this is probably a Podscape super graphic that is going to get even more crowded as we speak? Maybe at this moment, there are probably like people who are going to join the industry and become a podcaster, for example.
Yeah, no, for sure. It does. Absolutely. I think when I started, it's crazy to me in January, it'll be 5 years since I started in the podcast industry. And when I started, it felt like kind of the new thing, which is kind of silly because podcasting started in 2004. But really, we started in 2016 and things had just kind of started to get exciting, right? Let's see, Midroll had been acquired by EW Scripps, I want to say in 2015. And so that was kind of like a big acquisition that had taken place. I think it's one of the first acquisitions in the space. And it really felt like you said, even in Asia, where you're at the entry levels of what's happening in the podcast space. And it feels a little bit like, gosh, who's out there? And because everything is online, which is incredible and wonderful, it's harder sometimes to get a sense of who everyone is. And the podcast conferences, I think, have been so instrumental for me, just getting to get out there and meet people face to face, because it's so great that we get to talk online. But then when you get to see somebody face to face, you can really, solidify your relationship and get to know them better. Of course, during this interesting year, none of that has taken place, but I'm sure we'll get there again. And I think that what this Podscape has done is really just helped create a picture of what is happening in the space, at least in the US. But really, I think that a lot of these players are worldwide companies that are trying to work in the podcast space at an international level. And it's exciting to see that there are these segments that are emerging, and we can clearly say, oh, yes, you are this kind of a company. You are providing this kind of service. And yes, it definitely warms my heart and it excites me, because this is literally just the beginning. Really to think about, and Bryan and Cameron should both be happy that they are the ones that created this. But like Evo, a gentleman I was speaking with earlier today on my live stream, he had said, gosh, in the digital space and in lots of other spaces, there are these landscapes that have been created. And this is really like the first one that has been created in the podcast space. And to know that you and I are here at the beginning talking. And it's funny to say at the beginning, because of course it's not the beginning. There's lots of people who've gotten us to this point. But to be here in this moment, working in this industry, I think is just a total gift.
That's amazing. And I have to talk about smart speakers because I recently finally got one. Do you have a smart speaker at home?
I don't. I know that they listen to you, and I'm like, I don't know. I can't take it.
You know how incredible it is to be able to tell Google, right? Play, the podcast advertising Playbook, and just start playing your latest episode and having your voice right in the middle of my apartment. Feels like, oh, we are very connected, even though we are so far apart, right?
Yes.
So I've seen you for like months, but it still feel like, I haven't, we are not strangers because we follow each other's posts on LinkedIn a lot. We watch each other's live stream. So I have to ask you about this live stream question after the smart speaker question. Do you think that smart speakers penetration, especially, where Apple, is rolling out, I think they have their own HomePod, right? And of course, Google has their own, I think, I can't remember the name all of a sudden. The one that I bought is a Harman Kardon. It comes with the Google, OK Google feature. And of course, Amazon has their Echo. Do you think that this is going to ramp up even exponentially the number of podcasters who are entering the industry and advertisers being more interested to do activation or even campaigns or buying more ads on podcasters and all their shows as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Edison Research has done a really nice job of tracking smart speakers and their penetration in the market and their penetration as it comes to podcast listenership. And certainly over the course of, I don't know, I would say probably the last 2 or 3 years that they've been doing that report, we have seen an increase in the use of smart speakers. And to your point, it is so nice, even though I don't personally have one, most of my friends have them. And, I have experienced, oh yeah, it's so great to be able to just tell your smart speaker what it is that you want to listen to. I think what is so exciting is the space that audio is taking. Because when you think about the progression of audio in our lives, it used to be such, we really just listen to audio through a radio, which is terrific, but that's just a radio, right? And now we can listen through our computers, we can listen through our smart speakers, we can listen through our phones with our wireless headphones, right? There's just all of these different places we can listen in our cars where we have this ability to get the audio. And I think that the ease of use with smart speakers really does make it so that there are no barriers to listening. And so because of that, I don't necessarily think that advertisers are going to say, hey, we want to advertise, because of the smart speaker. I think that it's just going to increase the overall reach. We certainly have seen some agencies who look to place buys on podcasts that have smart speaker, tools set up so that, we know that they can, be heard on smart speakers. But but I think that that's really more about them knowing that if you have a smart speaker that you're in a certain demographic. So yeah, it's been an interesting progression for sure.
And these days, when I have a new guest coming on to my podcast, right, the CMO Asia podcast, like the first thing I would do, when it comes to researching on my guests, is actually to ask Google whether they have any episodes that I can actually listen to, where they actually talk about their pet topic, right? And it helps me to actually, know more about a person by hearing their voice from the speaker, rather than having to read, maybe their LinkedIn profile, look at some of the activity on social media. It actually strains the eyes more. And of course, being in this space, right, now that we are all in this podcasting industry, it's also changing our consumption habits as well. I actually spend less time on Netflix after I got a smart speaker. And I think that my consumption of podcast shows have gone up by 1,000% ever since I got the speaker sitting in my bedroom. So I think this is going to probably affect many other listeners or people who love media consumption, right? They're going to probably switch to listening to podcast shows because probably, the music consumption is also a big part, but having that voice in the room and telling a story or, just basically sharing knowledge as well. This is actually the fastest and easiest way to learn. And for someone who is like having a poor eyesight, by staring on my screens all day long, right? I actually appreciate the fact that I have an alternative rather than having to stare at a screen to read about stuff. So that's how I learn these days. So I'm really excited about that part. So I hope that maybe for Christmas, somebody will buy you a smart speaker for your Christmas present.
That's actually a really good suggestion. I'll have to write that down on my Christmas list. Send it to Santa.
Exactly. And of course, before we let you go, right, we want to ask you, what do you have to share with us today? Because I understand you prepared some slides. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, depending on how much time we have, I would love to talk to you about dynamic ad insertion. It'll probably take me about 20 minutes to run through it. And if we have time to do that, I'd love to share it with everyone.
We have 10 minutes, so hopefully you can times two the speed. And you can see the share your screen button at the bottom. So if you click share screen, we'll be able to see your slides. So go ahead.
Excellent. Okay, terrific.
Yeah.
Okay, can you see me okay, Wayne?
Yes, added to stream. So dynamic ad insertion is what's on my screen. So please go ahead.
Perfect. That's great. So I'll just briefly run through the presentation. I'll skip a couple things that aren't as important for us. But I just wanted to talk about kind of the history and the future of podcast advertising, because I think it's so important. Really, when we look at what has historically happened, we have done embedded and baked in ads in podcasts. And what that means is that when you are producing your podcast, you produce the ad along with a specific episode and you publish one audio file, right? So let's say you're publishing episode 100 today, and that episode has an ad for ZipRecruiter, let's say. So episode 100 has an ad for ZipRecruiter. So if I listen to episode 99, I'm not going to hear the ad for ZipRecruiter. And if I listen to episode 101, I'm not going to hear the ad. I will only hear the ad in episode 100. And that's the baked in style of advertising. And the great part about baked in ads is that they stay around forever. So the advertiser gets a little extra, whereas, if I listen to the episode today, I'm going to hear the ad. And if I listen in 3 months, I'm going to hear the ad. If I listen in a year, sometimes even 2 years to that episode, I'm still going to hear the ad. So that advertiser is getting a lot of extra that they're not paying for. And that's how things have traditionally been done. But I really believe that they're moving to a dynamic style. So really, we see right now that 52% of ads within the US are embedded, but 48% are dynamically inserted. And I think that that's where we're headed. So I'm just going to briefly kind of talk about what dynamic ad insertion is. So essentially, you have your current episodes and you can insert ads into those current episodes with dynamic ad insertion by putting ad insertion points in those episodes. But the beauty of dynamic ad insertion is that we have this entire back catalog that we put insertion points in and that you can also insert ads into. So the concept is that you can insert ads into your full catalog of podcast episodes, because my perspective is that it doesn't matter when content is created, it matters when it's consumed. So if you listen to a podcast episode today, you are a very valuable listener and you should be served an ad message. It doesn't matter if that episode is 2 years old. If you're listening today, you are a customer today. So that's kind of the value of podcast advertising. Do you have any questions about that, Wayne?
So far, so good. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. So in terms of a couple quick misconceptions I want to clear up is that a lot of times people feel like dynamic ad insertion only works with pre-produced recorded ads. So they think of like Geico ads or like some of these huge corporations that do almost radio style ads. And they think that when we talk about dynamic ad insertion, that's what we mean. And my take on it is that we don't have to just do these pre-recorded produced ads. We definitely can do host read ads, and we should do host read ads. I think that they're very, host read ads are super, super important. And again, looking at some of the stats that have come out, really about 93% of podcast ads are either host or producer read. So they've got that feel to them. The other misconception is a lot of times people feel like their listeners all are listening to their current episodes, when in fact that hasn't been our experience at True Native Media. I recently had a show that was doing 225,000 downloads per month, and 150 of those were coming from back catalog. So really, those downloads are happening across your entire catalog. Now, in terms of who dynamic ad insertion is good for, podcasts that have a large back catalog, it's really good for you, because if you've got a big back catalog, then that means you're going to get more listeners, and that's going to be a good opportunity for you to take advantage of selling ads. Your content needs to be evergreen, which means if you're a news show or a sports show, if you're current events, it might not be as good for you. So make sure that your content is something that's just as good, to listen to today as it was 2 years ago. And then if you're really interested in getting ad revenue for your show, if that's the goal, then dynamic insertion is good for you, because you're going to make more money because you're just reaching more people. And then in terms of setting up your show for dynamic ad insertion, you want to make sure that you have a hosting provider that's going to offer that dynamic ad insertion, availability, because not all hosting providers do. So make sure that that's an option for you. And then you go through your entire catalog and you mark your catalog, each episode, with where the ad insertion points would be, because we don't want the ad to appear right in the middle of a sentence, right? We want to have the ad flow with the content. And then you want to make sure that that's really mastered with the audio levels, so that when people are listening to the content and then an ad comes in, it's not very loud, because since the computer is inserting the ad, it's not something that you can master yourself. You have to make sure that the levels are set correctly. And then in terms of creating revenue for yourself, really, the industry standards on CPMs or cost per thousands are about $15 to $50. And I just wanted to cover just a brief scenario from one of our shows. We had a show that was doing 6,000 downloads per episode in a 30-day period, doing embedded baked-in ads. And in 2019, they made $10,000, a little over $10,000. But then when they converted to dynamic ad insertion, they were doing 60,000 downloads per month. And they were able in 2020 to increase their sales to over 27,000. So essentially, they were able to increase their sales by $17,000 just by switching to dynamic insertion. So how are we doing on time?
4 more minutes left, so please speed things up.
Okay, sounds good. So in terms of additional benefits, if you're going to be doing dynamic ad insertion, you can use it for other things besides just ads. You could use it to insert a brand new intro into your back catalog. You could, create a segment that maybe you wanted to run across all of your episodes. You could insert that. I don't think that's something people think about. So that dynamic insertion feature can be used for lots of different things. It allows you to create brand safety. So if somebody, if a company that was advertising with you did something you didn't like, and maybe you didn't want to align with them anymore, you could instantly pull their ads out. And then you also can have current messaging for your advertisers, which I think is really important. You're not listening to any outdated ads. All the ads are ads that are current. And then finally, you can promote your own products and services. So if you have a book, a course, or something that you want to market, you can use your podcast to do that and reach your entire audience. So I think that's it. We did it.
That's brilliant. Yeah, your timing is impeccable. And of course, value, especially the part about, the rise, how, in terms of the income or revenue that are generated as a result of having this mechanism, right? Really helps podcasters to probably, see their wallets lined up, of course. But for those who are not concerned with download numbers, it's great for brand safety. And I think, especially for podcasts like mine, where my content pillar is the CMO Asia podcast, right? Sometimes it's important to ensure that not outdated information is being communicated across to the audience, and most of the CMOs, really, appreciate if there's a mechanism that allows, us to actually update certain content that has already been outdated, and basically provide a disclaimer and helps them to actually, still effectively communicate to the audience without quoting the wrong stuff, for example. So I think this is a great sharing by you, and how I wish, we can do this for an hour or even 2 hours. But of course, we have more all-star lineup coming up next. Yeah. You've been a great star so far in terms of providing so much value for us. I hope to re-invite you back for our second edition of this PodFest Asia event, hopefully in middle of January or maybe early February, depending on how things are. And of course, we are actually aiming for our first in-person event in Singapore, hopefully at Marina V in Singapore, where we can invite you to come and talk to our audience. So I think it's something that we can all look forward to, provided the pandemic is not going to screw things up for us.
Yeah.
2020, right?
I would love to come to Singapore. That would be super fun. So yeah, well, thank you so much, Wayne, for having me on. Congratulations on your live event. And I just hope the rest of it is super, super great. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, you can reach out at truenativemedia.com. I'm also super active on LinkedIn if you want to find me there.
So audiences who are tuning in, either they are replaying this or on your smart speakers, make sure they hit up Heather Osgood on LinkedIn. I think that's the best way to actually get hold of her. So thank you so much for participating in this event. So I see you very, very soon, Heather. Take care.
Okay, sounds good. You too. Thanks, Wayne.
Bye.
Bye.
So that's Heather. And we are expecting our second guest to come on immediately after this. Let me take a look at my calendar because even I'm like losing track because we have so many people in our lineup. And let's see what my calendar is telling me. After Heather, it's Sethi, who is going to be coming up soon to talk to us about his new podcast show with James Cridland called Podland. So I'm expecting him anytime. Meanwhile, let's just see whether he's online. Let me check my phone, yeah? So let's see. I'm going to just text him and ask him how he's doing and whether he's ready to come on. So bear with me. So yeah, I think he's in the studio. Let's welcome him. And I gotta change the banner so that I'm introducing the right person. Sam, how are you doing? My first time seeing you, my friend.
Very well, Wayne. How are you? Nice to meet you.
I'm fantastic. If I'm not wrong, you're residing in the UK right now, yeah?
Absolutely, yes.
Which part of the UK?
Near London, about 30 miles out of London. Little village on the river called Marlow.
Fantastic. So you're a football fan, I believe?
Massive Liverpool fan, yes.
Seriously? You're not saying that just to be happy, right?
I've been a Liverpool fan for 40 years. Hang on a minute. Let me prove it.
40 minutes. 40 years. Liverpool fan lives here. Wow. I should be wearing my new Nikes, the new home jersey.
Absolutely.
So, what's your take on Kevin Keller, our new keeper, who just performed brilliantly against Ajax Amsterdam?
It's got to be better than Adrian. I mean, anyone's better than Adrian.
Yeah, I think it has great future ahead of him. Yeah, and I'm actually hoping that he will come on again for our next game against Wolves, because I think Alisson is injured again.
Yeah,
hamstring. The common theme for this season. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm worried that Andy Robbo got injured as well.
So definitely gonna be talking, or spend 30 minutes about Liverpool. That's gonna bore the podcasting industry people to death, right? Especially the Man U fans who might be tuning as well.
They don't know what football is anymore at Man U. That's the main thing.
Yeah, so condolences to Man United fans, but okay, let's move on and talk about your exciting new show, Podland, with James Cridland. How did this, idea for this show happen? And of course, we definitely need to deep dive into the behind the scenes and how you guys actually got together to collaborate. Because in this part of the world, right, in Asia, I can actually honestly tell you there's very little collaboration. In fact, podcasters don't even talk to one another. We are all really? In our own silos and doing our own stuff. So how's the situation, in that part of the world where you are living in? And how did you get in touch with James Cridland, who I believe is based in Australia?
Yeah, he is. Yeah. So James has been doing an amazing newsletter every day called podnews.net, and I highly recommend everyone go and get it. He's got nearly everyone in the industry as a sponsor or a guest, or at least he writes about them. And back in March when COVID first hit, I and two friends, we decided to do a podcast festival. We did it over Zoom, and we had a full production team. And we had Kara Swisher from the New York Times and George the Poet, who won the Brit Awards, and a whole bunch of really good people. And James was one of the guests, and I interviewed him, and he's a Brit, but he now lives in Australia. And we had a great interview, and James is someone I read every day. And I realized that what James didn't do, though, was his daily podcast is like 3 minutes long, and it's just headline after headline after headline. And I wanted to do a podcast that looked at the industry, not just, tell me the news, but look behind the news. Give me the trends, give me the analysis, give me the ideas. And so I reached out to James and I said, hey, do you fancy doing this together? We could do it. And he said yes. And so we did a couple of rehearsal podcasts, which weren't very good, by the way. I'll just be honest. But we've got the formula now, and it's really sharp. And the first episode drops tomorrow. So yeah, I'm really excited.
That's brilliant, and we're so excited to have you actually come on to our PodFest Asia and come and speak to us and to announce and launch this new weekly podcast about podcasting, right? So who came up with the name Podland, by the way?
That's me, I'm afraid to say. Well, it comes from we tried because James is James Cridland. So I just thought Podland after James Cridland. So that was where it came from. There's nothing more clever than that, I'm afraid. Except somebody's got pod.land as a domain and they don't use it. So it's really annoying because we really would have liked the domain to have been pod.land. But there you go.
I actually like the name of your show, Podland. It reminds me of I don't know. It seems to be like a place where you aspire to be, or like someone gets excited when they hear Podland. Okay, I want to be there.
Yes,
it's definitely a great idea because I share the same views in terms of like when I listen to his podnews.net, right? His daily news on my smart speakers is way too short, like 3 minutes. I just want to hear more of his voice, and who better than you to actually, have a to and fro conversation and actually bring in more guests as well, right? Who are some of the exciting guests you guys have lined up next?
Adam Curry is one of the big ones that we've lined up. So Adam invented podcasting pretty much with Dave Weiner, and Adam has been working on the new podcasting namespace, the new Podcast 2.0 namespace. So if you want to find out more about it, you can go to podcastindex.org. And he's been writing that namespace. Me and James have been helping. So lots of new features for podcasters. How do you list your guests? How do you make money? How do you do discovery of certain chunks of your podcast? So all of that's going into the XML namespace. And so Adam's going to come on as one of our guests. We've got the head of Spotify's podcasting coming on. We've got the head of Apple's podcasting coming on. We've got Descript's CEO coming on. We've got some great, the list is endless. We've got Buzzsprout, LibSync, all these guys are going to be telling us what's going on in their world in the industry. And we're going to sort of analyze them, give them a little bit of a grilling and just find out what's really going on under the hood.
This is brilliant. And I'm already looking forward to hearing all these great podcast episodes. And of course, for our listeners or for those who are watching this live stream, do subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, right? Or visit your website. If I'm not wrong, the URL is podland.news. Is that right?
Correct. Thanks, Wayne. Yes, it is. That's perfect. Yeah, please do. And look, we want your feedback. We want your comments. We want your questions. If you've got stuff you want us to answer, let us know. And equally, if you've got a guest or if you're a guest and you want to come on our show, let us know as well, because, we're not only going to just do the big companies, but we want to do, the breaking companies, some really exciting companies underneath. There's a company called Lately.ai that's just coming out. It's a brilliant company. I highly recommend everyone look at it. It's challenging. One of the real challenges for podcasts is like we spend hours creating these podcasts, but actually I spend hours distributing and promoting these podcasts. And the way I used to do it was manually. Now Gary V's using Lately.ai as well. And the idea is that you put your MP3 into it, it uses AI to analyze the core parts of it and uses a bit of NLP, linguistic programming, to break up the structure. And then it produces 30 or 40 tweetable items from your podcast that you can then put out on a calendar base. So you can say, look, there's the 30 tweets. I can add them, change them, but then put them out one an hour or one a week or one a day or whatever you want to do, however often you want to update. And it just breaks up the content, because the problem is a podcast that's 1 hour might have 10 or 12 golden nuggets of knowledge in it. But if somebody can't listen to it more than 10 minutes or 15 minutes, they'll never get it all. So Lately.ai, as an example, is a great way of breaking out the content within your podcast and making it easily discoverable. I mean, that's just one example of a company.
This is amazing, and I think it's a godsend. Lately.ai, lately spelled Lately.
Correct. Yeah, that's it.
And I'm going to check it out, because I think it's going to benefit the podcast or content creators all around the world, right? And being able to just deep dive and using all these AI tools to instantly generate tweets. Is that what you're saying? And able to contextualize and transcribe?
Yes. So what it does, it takes your podcast, it transcribes it, it then puts it through a bit of AI, pulls out 30 tweetable items. You don't have to use them all. You might say, okay, there's only 5 that I really want to use. But what it does is it puts the audio clip with the tweet, so that if you put it out and you see the tweet and you go, I just want to hear it, and then you listen to that little piece and you go, wow, that's really cool, I want to listen to the whole podcast, and there's the link, click, bang, you're back into the podcast.
Fantastic. I think you're definitely one of the guests that I'm very much eager to look forward to talk to you a bit about this, especially on technology side, on AI, on voice especially, because I believe your show is also searchable via Alexa, if I'm not wrong, right? Anyone
Correct.
could just Alexa play Marlow FM and they will get to hear your voice. Is that true?
Yeah, I've got a radio show, so I do a radio show. I'm in the middle of setting up a new commercial radio station as well. I have my own podcast. I have a daily podcast that's a generic news one, and I have my own interview ones, which is called Sound Talks Technology. And what I love about it is everything I do. If you listen to Simon Sinek's book, Find Your Purpose, my why is to share my platform so others can share their voice. And everything I do, whether it's building Alexa skills or being on the radio or running podcast festivals or running podcasts, is all about creating voice platforms so that other people can use them, and then we can get the message out.
This is brilliant. And I used to doing your weekly radio show like every week these days. Even in Asia, right? We love to listen to foreign podcasts or broadcast content that we don't get here in Singapore, for example. Like I remember the days when I was listening to radio on BBC World Service, right? My favorite show was John Peel's radio show, where
Brilliant.
he basically showcased bands that are so undiscovered or ahead of the curve. Is like the way for you to find out a band like Mr. Bungle, for example, is the only opportunity to do that is if you listen to John Peel's show, and you can only listen to that on a foreign station. So like these days we can listen to your shows, which is from the UK, and of course your radio show is something that you continuously are still doing, right? It's not just podcasting or doing online events that actually allows you to see action at the moment.
Now, I think what's really interesting now, we're beginning to meld live, like we're doing now, with podcasting. So radio is in that spectrum. So radio is live and it's interactive and it's a fixed time. Whereas podcasting it doesn't have to be live. It can be on demand. And I think what we're doing here, which is, using StreamYard, and it is live if you wish to watch it live. But of course, many people will watch this as a on-demand podcast later on. And I think what we're finding is the best of both worlds. If you want to interact, you want to communicate, and you want to be there, then this is what you want to do. But if you just want to consume content while you're walking the dog, riding the bike, going for your run at a later point, you know what? Audio allows you to do both.
This is amazing. And, I'm going to go and check out your radio show. And, before we let you go, we definitely have to talk about how you get started in this podcasting space. You mentioned about your radio shows. So even maybe before that, what were you doing earlier in your career?
Early in my career, I started out I'm very old, so I'm in my 50s. And I started out in a little unknown company at the time called Microsoft. I was employee 20 in the UK. So no one had ever heard of Microsoft. We only had two products, DOS and Excel. That's when I started. And so I saw the growth. I then ran a little known company called Netscape, the browser company. I was the European product manager for them. And so I used to go around explaining to people what the internet was. And they said, that'll never catch on. I then moved on to another company called Gateway Computers, and I set up their online business. And after that, I've done several startups. And I started something you may have heard of called TechCrunch. So I started TechCrunch Europe for Mike Carrington. And since then, I've just enjoyed, and I got into podcasting probably 4 or 5 years ago, just as a way of extending the radio that I was doing. And actually, if I'm really honest, I love podcasting probably more than I do radio, because a conversation on the radio, you're fixed by the schedule. So if I have a radio show, I got to talk to you for an hour. I can't talk to you for 50 minutes or 50 or 61 minutes. I have to do 60 minutes. Whereas on a podcast like this, I only say a podcast is as interesting and as long as the conversation is interesting. So if the podcast or the guest is boring, it might be a 20-minute conversation. Don't make it last 60 minutes because it's 20 minutes worth of really interesting content. And so I prefer podcasts, I think, because it gives you that ability to expand or contract the length based on the interest of the speaker.
Spot on. I think that's the real reason why it's taking off, right? Because there's no time limit. There is basically no set, of rules in terms of like where the narrative will go to. And it's like, we love Joe Rogan podcast for the reason because it could be 3-4 hours long. And sometimes you just never know, whether he's going to be like talking about MMA or about CBD or other things, exactly. Right? It's always like going into different areas that radio probably is impossible to go to. So I'm with you on that. We need to also find out, in terms of like the industry where you're in right now, it's so different from where you started, which is software company, startup, and of course, all these brilliant tech companies that you were involved in as well. Now you're in the podcasting space. You see a huge difference in terms of the people, in terms of the community, in terms of like people getting together to collaborate and build great stuff?
I think it's very similar. So when I first started out in IT, there was Lotus, Ball and Paradox, Microsoft, all these young, small startup companies. And we all used to meet. We're all in our 20s and it was great. And we'd just meet at shows and it was exciting. And then those companies matured. But then along came the internet, and then there was suddenly Netscape, and then there was suddenly all these small little companies like Alta Vista and Google and Yahoo, and suddenly we're all mixing like that. And that's where the energy was. And then along came Facebook and the social media companies. And now what we're seeing is the podcasting companies, the Spotify's, yes, they're the big players, and Apple, but you'll begin to see Buzzsprout underneath, and Lately, and Descript, and all these young, really hungry companies that are growing. And that's where the energy is. The energy moves. So, I would never want to work for a Microsoft now. That'd be the dullest, oldest, boringest company to work for, right? Because it's just process and it's corporate and it's old. They will pretend that they're young and trendy and on the edge, but they're not. They're all about, process and business, and they've got layers of bureaucracy. Whereas the stuff on the edge is now in the podcasting world, and that's where it is. And I think as we evolve, those companies will begin to mature, and we'll see the winners in the space and we'll see the losers, unfortunately. I think the biggest danger in the podcasting space is the guys in the middle, the hosting companies. They're not adding value, right? That's the problem. So Descript does a brilliant job of, transcribing and editing your podcast. Lately does a great job of distributing it. Spotify is buying up the best content. But people like Libsync, Simplecast, Buzzsprout, unless they can change what they do, all they're doing is taking my RSS feed and feeding it somewhere else. eventually you'll just cut them out. So I don't know, that's probably going to be the thing you see disappear soon. It'll become bought by others, but there will be some great energy within the podcasting world. We're just only beginning to see the beginning of podcasting, and that's what I love about it.
Yeah, and of course, the innovation and the technology in terms of the hardware side as well is just beginning, right? And we are now seeing all these change in the content consumption behaviors. And of course, with smart speakers invading our homes, you have one of those as well. Yeah. So
yeah, these are great, and this is
I have the same equipment. Yeah.
Yeah, they're brilliant, aren't they?
How much do you love that Rodecaster Pro equipment?
It's brilliant. I mean, because I think what it does is it takes home podcasting to a studio level. So I've got a radio studio as well that I do the radio station from. And, you've got a full setup. But one of those is brilliant. You add it to your laptop, you get a mic, you've got the full set. I can do, my pre-rolls, my post-rolls, my ads, my jingles. I can do, if let's say I had a recording of somebody coming in, I can bring that recording into the live session and we can still talk about it. So it makes podcasting, it sort of takes it from here to here. And I think, people, once they begin to understand the differences and what they can do with it, it's brilliant.
Fantastic. We have 10 minutes left. So we're going to talk about a bit more about voice. So what's the most requested instruction that you gave to your Alexa?
Sadly, it's how I set a timer. But I will say the thing that I love about the Alexa, I've got 7 Alexas in the home, and I may be getting rid of them all.
Seriously? For what reason?
Yeah. So I love Alexa. I think they're amazing what they do, and I better turn her off before she answers. But I think I think we're going to see Apple in the race come back. Everyone has said Siri is rubbish, and I agree. Right now, Siri is just a useless voice assistant, right? But if you looked at the last announcement that Apple did with the HomePod Mini, with the A5 chip, with the W2 chips in here, with the M1 chip in the laptops, you look at all of that underlying ecosystem and you start to look at how I had Amazon Echo Buds and I got rid of them, because every time I wanted to connect them with my laptop or my phone, it was just awful. These things are brilliant. I get close, it knows it's my laptop. I put my phone out, it goes back to my phone. I get a HomePod Mini, it knows it's my HomePod Mini. It just has that immediate simplicity and it works. And I think what Apple are doing, by all rumors, is they're building a search engine to take on Google. If they build that search engine, Siri suddenly gets a brain, right? Suddenly she's intelligent. Suddenly she has access to content. Suddenly when you say to Siri, X, Y, what's the time? Where's this place? How do I get somewhere? She will have the answer rather than, sorry, I can't help you. And I just think Apple is the tortoise in the race with the hare, and the hare has been Amazon, and they've gone ahead and they've done brilliant. But I think you're beginning to see that gap is going to close over the next couple of years. And I think that's where Apple, I think Apple, with the privacy position that it's taken, will come back and take on Amazon quite strongly in the next couple of years.
And it's definitely hitting up with this smart speaker boom, right? It's leading to the reinvention of at-home audio, and it's all getting content creators, podcasters really excited. And I think that we all planning or getting ready, or just even like building our inventory so that, when the time comes to even see more action in terms of leveraging on the growth and of course the monetization aspect as well of the reinvention of at-home audio. That's going to be great. So, and you mentioned about your AirPods as well. So the outdoor is definitely also a game, or should I say a place that's getting also very crowded. So it seems like the trend is now moving towards at-home audio where competition is not so strive yet. So we are all attacking that area. So before we go, do you have any last message for our audience, especially in Asia? Have you been to Asia before to do your talk?
No, I haven't. I mean, I'm obviously Indian by birth, and I'd love to go back and come. I'd certainly love to come back to Asia. We did a podcast festival called Voices of the World, and we had speakers from China, Singapore, India and Japan. And let me say this, the East is ahead of the West in podcasting by a million miles right now. You may not think it, but you've got the monetization models properly done. So we don't have a micropayment system like WeChat or any of those type of models. Look at Himalaya. Himalaya made 7 billion in revenue last year, right? That's why Andreessen Horowitz invested into it. There isn't a hosting company in the West making anywhere near that money. You know, you've got that model correct. You've got the other part of it that people, you know, are producing. The number one country for listening to podcasting is Korea, right? Singapore's not far behind. China's not far behind. India's catching up. You know, in the West, America likes to think it's leading the world in podcasting, but it's not. You know, Ireland does a better penetration of listening to podcasting in the West than America. So the growth is all going to be, or the leading growth is going to be in the Far East. That's where I'm looking for what the new models will be. And then the West will follow. You know, everyone who's listening to this Asian PodFest should realize that actually Asia is ahead of the game and that the West is looking to follow you in how nobody's monetizing their podcasts in the West, right? Everyone's scrambling for dynamic ad insertion or sponsors or some other means of making money, Patreon, and they're not really making a lot of money. So your model over for micropayment systems, which allow people to pay for podcasting and pay the content creators, is actually the best model. And we just wish we had it.
I think that's a great point. And I've actually invited the co-founder of PodFest China to actually come to our event and talk more about, you know, this aspect, especially the monetization part as well. And I do agree with you in terms of like we are ahead in some aspects. And in terms of like having all this infrastructure, right, it's all ready. And of course, I'm just referring to maybe even like the Wi-Fi connection, for example. 5G, you know, is already available in many cities in Asia. And of course, they're reliable, they're fast. And there's also the COVID aspect as well with how it's recovering faster than the rest of the world in Asia. At this moment, we are experiencing, you know, zero rates, you know, of infection for weeks and months already for certain other cities in Asia. So like business will definitely flow back to this part of the world first. So yeah, I'm you know, just as excited as you in terms of like how to be part of this, you know, industry and see its growth, right? See it thriving at the same time. But of course, what I really loved about the West is in terms of the unity and the community spirit, how everyone is collaborating with one another and building great stuff together. So I'm so grateful, you know, that you come on and actually share with us and launch your podcast, Podland with James Quillen podcast right here and actually announce it to our audiences in Asia. So I'm really grateful for you for that. And I really appreciate you for coming on.
Wayne, thank you so much for inviting me. Everyone who's listening in, thank you so much. Do, as Wayne said, please subscribe, look us up, podland.news, and good luck with the rest of the show.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Sam Sethi. So I'll see you very soon, Sam, in Asia, hopefully.
As Liverpool champions, we'll come on the Asian tour.
Yeah, let's do it. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Cheers. Jamie, how are you?
Hi, Wayne. Good morning.
Wow.
I'm good.
Good to see you. 1 week after we had coffee together in the heart of downtown Singapore. So for the audience in Asia and beyond, you know, share with us what do you do and how do you get into the podcasting space and how would you describe your company to people who doesn't know about Matchcast?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first off, thanks for having me here. So I'm actually running a company called Matchcast, which you've rightly said. Our goal is actually bring monetization to the podcasting world. We see ourselves being the first Asia advertising platform. We help a podcaster identify brands and work with brands who actually want to advertise in podcasts to match one another. As simply said, that's what we do. We are Matchcast. We match podcaster with brands that are looking for advertising in podcasts. And on the other hand, we help brands advertise themselves into podcasts and ideally find the right sort of audience that resonate with one another.
This is fantastic. So great introduction. And we need to maybe back it up a little bit, go back to how you get started in terms of like, I understand, you know, during my conversation, my meeting with you over coffee that you are one of the successful Singaporeans who actually had a working stint for many years in America before you moved back to Singapore, and you actually spent time working out of Times Square, right? I think near the MTV studios. That's where you based yourself at for many years. Tell us about your experience in New York, and in the end, why did you decide to come back to Singapore?
Great question. Absolutely. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So actually I was very young, I would say, early in my careers. I wanted to be a producer more than anything. So I actually went to the US to study film, and I was working out of Times Square because I did my stint with NYU, with his School of Arts, learning how to direct a film. And I was very lucky. I actually did a few stints with making films. And then what happened was I ended up my first gig with MTV out of Times Square. And as I was saying to you, I was literally living on the 41st Street, and then 42nd Street is where Times Square is. So we get all the good parties, we get all the good, events, and you can literally sit one street behind the stage. That was when I was in my 20s. So it was a great time, but also, after 9/11, there was a bit of chaos within the US. I decided to come back, partially also because at that time my family is still here in Singapore, and I came back to actually work on a couple of projects. So one of the first thing I did was with MediaCorp, and then building this platform called Mob TV, which is the first streaming platform here in Asia. And then after that, I went back to the US working for MySpace before coming back and settling down in Singapore again. So it was quite a chaotic time, but what was great was going back and forth into US and Singapore allowed me a different view of things, where I saw how social media was growing in the US and slowly came to Asia. And I saw the same thing, I guess, when I started Matchcast, but I didn't see it. So I think earlier your guest, Sam, said it very well. I actually was very much inspired by Himalaya. I was actually building a company, any company, with EF in Hong Kong. And I stumbled upon Himalaya, and I saw podcasting was really growing in China. They had a really good model, but somehow that wasn't the case in the rest of the US and in Southeast Asia. And that's when I started to build Matchcast, because my background really as a marketer, I think helped influence my decision to build something which I think is in the ad tech, MarTech world. And I think that kind of was what inspired me to start Matchcast.
Fantastic. And of course, you studied their model. You have seen it really, taken off in that part of Asia, right? Why do you think it's not really working out that well in the rest of the world? Is it because of different, should I say, different culture that comes into play? Maybe can you expand on that a little bit for us?
Absolutely. When people talk about Himalaya, they like to think about Himalaya now. And we always have the habit of doing that. But if you actually trace back to Himalaya, it started really 12 years ago. They struggled a lot, actually. If you look at Himalaya's history, they were struggling with one, getting audience onto the platform. Second, with content. It was even involved in controversy where they were kind of putting all kinds of content that they didn't have rights for and putting it on the platform. But that's essentially how, it started. And it took about 12 years. I think it's coming to about 14 years now. They've only started going to the US. And you think about 12 years, that's a long time. That's almost as long as podcasting first started. I think the idea behind Himalaya was really to get people onto an alternative platform. And the way China is, we all marvel at how China kind of, went very far ahead with WeChat, micropayments. It had the right ecosystem. I lived in China for a bit. And when you look at the ecosystem, it was partially also because, one, the government was really, advocating a different form. Two, it didn't have the infrastructure for things like credit card. It didn't have infrastructure that helped enable sort of payment systems that the rest of the world had. It really had to bypass that system and go into phones, which was kind of what everyone wanted to have when the economy started booming. So I think what Himalaya did in that time was really bringing a lot of audience from the traditional radio towards internet, which kind of was really the boom of Alibaba, WeChat, and all the rest of the internet company in China. And they did that to great success. They started experimenting with models that they didn't have. And if you look at its true ecosystem, it was kind of a super app of its own. in the Western world, there was the same equivalent of Audible, and you have, ebooks, you have e-listening, you have Calm, apps which helps you with meditation, and you have podcasting. But Himalaya is everything. It had Patreon, it's part of Patreon. They had that micro payment on its system. You can listen and subscribe to people and then basically pay their course and listen to them. You can listen to audiobooks if you want and pay to subscribe to it. You can actually listen to podcasts if you prefer. You can listen to ebooks. So it has like a super app mentality with regards to everything audio. So I think with that, I think that's what really Himalaya had succeeded, that other parts of the world are struggling to figure out. But it just had that right, I think, source and ecosystem at that time where they were the very first to dictate how the audio landscape was going to look like. And I think that's the advantage of Himalaya.
That's a brilliant insight. And of course, you're, hedging your bets on podcasting, because when you are back in Singapore, right, instead of going back to doing what you used to do, which is film production, and I understand you were also CMO at a local e-commerce startup. So what actually compels you, to actually jump or deep dive into podcasting and being an active player in this podcasting space in this part of the world?
Yeah, so I spent the last, I would say, so early part of my career, I spent a couple of years in film and in production, and then went on to becoming, marketer at TripAdvisor and several companies in the US and then MediaCorp, and then with a stint in MySpace, and then back in Singapore. My last couple of roles in Singapore really was CMO of RedMart and NTUC Link. So coming back to, I think, Asia, like what you've said, I'm hedging a bet on podcasting. I think more so rather than just podcasting alone, I'm hedging a bet on audio. So when I was a CMO at RedMart and NTUC Link, I would spend lots and lots of money, especially with the RedMart, where I was helping them grow its user base into the heartland. We were doing everything from putting those flyers into your post box. We were spending lots and lots of money also into apps, into YouTube and Facebook to get you to actually shop with RedMart. And again, this was pre-Lazada deal. So we really had to grow the user base very strongly. And going back to where I was and, with that mentality of having spent a lot of money on performance marketing, it felt very natural that I should go into something like performance marketing. But what had happened in when I was in Hong Kong was I was really looking at the landscape. And, obviously you had Scott Brinker, and, I took upon myself to look at the MarTech landscape. And in the MarTech landscape, I was very surprised was there was actually no innovation within the audio space. You can find everything from PR to even personalization, to even like marketing technology that help to empower every aspect of your performance marketing. But there's really nothing in the space of audio. And it was a big blank there. And that's when I kind of started it, look into it. And that's when I felt that audio is really something that is interesting. And if you can see all the stats, with the growth of smart speaker, this is 2019 I started looking at a lot of statistics, is how podcast is growing. But then this ecosystem of the ad tech landscape and marketing technology landscape is still very new. And that's what I'm hedging the bet on. Second thing, I think audio it's very much like social influencing. If you look at social influencing and my stint with social media companies, is I realized that it takes a while. So very much like yourself, when you are a social media influencer, but your social media influencing is on the audio landscape. You're influencing people towards listening certain topics, to certain insights, and that is interesting. So we look at this landscape and we decided that, that could be a lot to be done. One, in the advertising technology space, and two, in terms of where podcasting would go, we're really only scratching the surface. And I think where I'm looking at Matchcast is we could, move in this direction and really sort of, together with this growth in podcasting, and really grow the industry.
This is brilliant. And of course, you just touched on Scott Brinker's fantastic, MarTech landscape, super graphic, right? So
Yeah.
just a couple of days back, Sounds Profitable, Bryan Barletta, and of course, the Magellan AI people, they came together and actually collaborated on a similar super graphic, but it's for, the much smaller podscape. So are you actually, in one of the particular verticals in the super graphic. Is Matchcast part of that? The number of global players. Or are you actually looking at not just being able to appear with a company logo, but able to do more in terms of contribution to this growing podcasting industry?
Yeah, I mean, when the podcast came out, I was really excited by it. It's really exciting to see everything in one single sort of landscape view. But as they said, it's not exhaustive. And I think when that came out, and the first thing I did was I reached out to Bryan. Hey, Matchcast is not there. But that's also partially our fault because we've been very quiet. We haven't been actively going out there and really market ourselves. In Southeast Asia, we spend a lot of time building the product. I think we've gotten to a stage where our product is, it's a very, I guess I'm a perfectionist. I think to a certain level where we're really excited. Right now on our website, we're already tracking every podcast that's out there. Over 1.4 million. Actually, it's now 1.5 million, going towards 1.6 million podcast titles and over 40 million episodes. I think we will be in the next version. And I think where we align to, and I think I remember sending that email to Magellan AI, was that we align ourselves towards the ad placement, marketplace, ad placements area. But on top of that, we also see ourselves with the statistics side. So in the West, obviously, there's companies like Chartable that's doing amazing things. And there are a lot of different companies like my podcast review that's actually doing things in the review side. But there's actually very little insights towards Southeast Asia. And my goal is to really shed a little bit more insights into that. So one of the things we did on Matchcast is obviously sharing like podcast insight, showing language, where is the language that's really growing in terms of popularity, where a lot of podcasts is being produced in a certain language, and then also the country where it is. I think, in the US, I think where you had the, advantage of just having everything just based out of US and in one language, English, we don't really have that, and even in Singapore, when we look at the landscape, podcaster could be producing podcasts in English, in Mandarin, and in Bahasa. So in one country like Singapore, you would have 3 different languages. In Hong Kong, it would be Cantonese and Mandarin. And in countries like Indonesia, it would be in Bahasa predominantly. And we actually saw a very interesting trend, even in Philippines. People are producing podcasts in dual language. So Philippines probably going to have more podcasts that's being tagged English and Tagalog, as opposed to just a pure English podcast. And I think that itself is something that I think the West haven't really quite caught on. I mean, ideally, we want them to be really understanding that, while Southeast Asia is really a big ecosystem, it's not one single country. There's not one single language. There's multiple languages. And that, I think, itself is a challenge.
That's a great insight. And, I always enjoy talking to you because, you're a CMO. And of course, we know that CMOs are always ahead of the curve. So you're one of those people that I really admire, in terms of you're always being able to spot the next trend. And of course, where are the regions in Asia where, the main action is right now. So obviously you mentioned about China, you mentioned about Philippines as well. So which other region other than Philippines, India, Indonesia, China, that, really makes you want to move there? Can I say Vietnam is another area or country that you would want to base yourself in and anchor yourself there?
Yeah, I think where Vietnam is I think you're absolutely right. I think Southeast Asia is a very exciting place. In terms of podcasting, we're seeing a really good, interesting trend. Obviously working on Matchcast, we have to look at trends. I think where the trends are, skewing towards is definitely Indonesia, where a lot of people are moving towards podcasts. And then somebody brought it up to me. I think it's partially also because of the ecosystem. A lot of people actually don't have a lot of bandwidth, and remembering that Indonesia, again, bandwidth is really important. They would buy these SIM cards, which then give them access to certain, amounts of internet data. And where bandwidth is so precious in a country like Indonesia, they would then listen to audio a lot more than opposed to watching video. So that has become somewhat of a trend building and habit forming experience over there. So audio is definitely primed to really rise there. In Philippines, I see the same thing. They're addending audio into part of their YouTube. So they're no longer focusing on YouTube. There are more and more podcasts happening in Philippines as well. And Vietnam, obviously, with the ecosystem happening there, as far as I can remember, some of the first earliest, podcasting startups that actually garnered, venture funding is actually out of Vietnam. But I think Vietnam ecosystem is a bit unique. It has a unique language that's not, transferable towards everywhere else. It's only mainly in Vietnamese. And in itself, its ecosystem is very much like China. So I think, it would be good to look at where Vietnam will go in the next couple of years, whether there could be a similar sort of Himalaya sort of popping up within its own ecosystem that actually dominates all of its listeners. Is that going to come out from the traditional radio FM, which is happening over there? Or is it going to come from a startup that's going to dominate that space? I think where Vietnam is, obviously our tech center is out there. I'm really extremely bullish over the tech talent out in Vietnam. So most of the time I'll be traveling to Vietnam, if not for COVID-19. I love the food there. So yes, in some ways you're absolutely right. I love to plant myself there. And I think, from a ecosystem landscape, it had the right ecosystem. Its tech talents is extremely tech savvy. So that itself will also translate into their listening habits, whether they're listening on traditional FM or they're more skewing towards listening on, podcasts to get alternative views and alternative insights. I think that's going to happen actually.
Which is already happening in China, right? They get most of the uncensored news from podcasts in China. So that's what I'm told. And something that I really, got inspired by before actually starting this PodFest Asia was actually something that I heard on my smart speakers when PodFest China episodes were pushed to me, and recommended by Google. And what happened was that, I was able to hear how, podcast industry there is really thriving, really growing, and the amount and the high level of knowledge and also resources being shared is astounding. It's like it makes me want to do a Chinese podcast for that very reason, because I think, of course, our roots are, we are all Chinese, right? Although we're in Singapore, and it's like it helps us to maybe relate to how, some of our forefathers as well, they're always able to also spot opportunities where others see obstacles. And in China, of course, the obstacles is in terms of the Great Firewall of China, but a lot of activity, a lot of growth, a lot of podcasts in the Chinese language are still being listed on Apple and Spotify, even though they have this firewall. So they overcome all these obstacles because they see there's opportunity where there's huge potential. So what would be your, in terms of next move? Are you going to actually move your Matchcast and expand into these areas, these countries that you mentioned? Or would there be some other exciting new region or city that has still been undiscovered?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did, I debated quite a fair bit, and I recently talked about it on a podcast show as well. One of the things we see is that, I think Southeast Asia ecosystem is still rising, and China is very, very strong in that. US has, I think the most excitement coming out of there. You look at the number of deals that's happening out there, the number of people that's actually going exclusive. And, with Podscape mainly, showcasing a lot of different US-based company. I think that's always interesting to look at where that's happening. One thing we're actually doing for sure, Matchcast is going to have a presence in the US. I think we're actually getting a lot of demand from out of there. But within Southeast Asia, I'm actually very, very bullish. So I spent a bit of time in China simply to cozy up to the Himalaya folks, understanding what they're doing. So one of the things that we're actually looking at is potentially partnering up with Himalaya, where we could actually help, podcasts go into Himalaya. That's very early stage conversations. But I think where I see the potential in the long run is where in Southeast Asia, I think we're prime, like exactly like what you said, when, you're bilingual, you could produce a podcast from Singapore and push it out to Himalaya and have a whole new audience-scape that is in China. And you'll become so-called their Wang Hong, right? In China. And that would be amazing. And I think we're missing that. We're not looking at the big picture that, it's predominantly language itself. Listenerscape, listener graph, it's very, very different. If you're doing a podcast in English, you might actually be getting a lot of US audience out of Singapore. You might also get, a lot of Europe audience listening to your podcast when you're producing that in English. But if you actually produce in Chinese, you would see that there are actually going to be much more audience that's out of China listening to your podcast, or from Taiwan, or even from Hong Kong. So listeners itself is actually only differentiated by the language of the podcast. It's not differentiated by where you're producing it from. So I think China is going to be very exciting. And obviously we're in Southeast Asia, we're actually speaking multiple language. That actually helps. We have also gotten feedback even from podcasters that, if they produce a Bahasa-based podcast here in Singapore, they get a lot of Indonesia listeners by default. It will be skewed towards 50-50. And so if you look at that landscape, it's extremely exciting. So two of the biggest market, I think, that, Matchcast will be focusing on, apart from the US, it's definitely, I think, in Southeast Asia, China itself, and then looking at the language ecosystem within here in Southeast Asia, and really putting our footprint in which we help brands identify podcasts that's produced in different language and from different country, and how they could take advantage of this growing landscape.
This is fantastic. And it's very interesting they brought out a point, about a show being produced in the Bahasa Indonesian language, right? Because right here in Singapore, I'm not sure whether it's the same can be said for the most recent Spotify annual report or the charts that they put out. The number one show or the number one podcast in Singapore is actually a Malay language podcast called Okay Let's Go, with their audience that are spanning across Southeast Asia in cities, in countries like Malaysia and Indonesia, where the Malay language has been widely spoken in Southeast Asia. So that show is number one in Singapore. So it shows that it's really valid, the point that you pointed out about just being able to produce shows and go to where your audiences are, right? So this is the same thing that the games, where the hardware producers, in terms of like the manufacturers, Apple, Amazon, the likes, they're all producing hardware to be placed at home so that it can be played. And smart speakers are entering our homes for the very reason, because consumers prefer to listen to audio shows on smart speakers. So this is where going to where the audience is really important. And probably you just inspired me to create a Chinese version of my CMO Asia podcast, which is my pillar content. It's something that I wish to embark on as soon as possible. And of course, who better to get more advice and tips on really crushing this Chinese market than talking to you, Jamie. So you inspired me today. And maybe before we let you go, are there any last message for our audience, or in fact, any new product rollout features for Matchcast? I believe, you have a remote team that are based in Vietnam at this moment, right? They're constantly, updating you with new product releases and new tools that will help, brands and advertisers and podcast content creators match even better. So tell us any sneak preview or what's in the pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So a couple of things I think for us. So first, I'll talk about some of the last things. You mentioned about smart speakers. If you look at the trends that's happening with smart speaker in the US, Asia hasn't reached that level. And if you look at even China, it hasn't reached that level. Most people are still listening from mobile phones, and I think when smart speakers start trending upwards, more podcasts will become really, really popular, because, podcasts as a way of becoming a requested item on smart speakers as well. So I think from a long-term trends, I would say, audio is primed to boom in Southeast Asia. We're only scratching the surface right now. And when we talk about Asia, predominantly you have looked at China very differently, India very differently from the rest of Southeast Asia. So I think that's going to be quite exciting the next couple of years. And in terms of product, that's what we're doing. We're focusing on these trends. So in terms of product landscape, we've actually just completed our amazing build. So first of all, if you go to Matchcast, you would find podcast insights that's relevant with regards to different language. But we've actually completed what we call as a 3-module build. One is Discover, the other is Insights, and then the last one is Building a Campaign. So remembering that our tool is mainly for brands. And then we have 2 different onboarding portion. One is if you're a podcaster like yourself, Wayne, you can actually go into Matchcast, add yourself to our website, and it's completely free, and then basically be able to be featured onto our platform. And what happens is when a brand, for example, that we work with, go and search for podcasts that's based out of Asia, or any part of the world, they would be able to see that CMO podcast is actually featured on Matchcast. And what that happens is in our discovery platform, we actually show how your shows are trending. When are you uploading it? How can they listen to each episode? And what are you ranking and where are you ranking in terms of the charts? We actually go into very much details about what your podcast show is about. That is part of our discovery platform. And all the brands can actually find it. And potentially what it helps is for you as a podcaster, you'll be able to get leads from them, be able to work with brands directly through Matchcast to actually have your podcast being advertised. Second thing is in the insights portion, we actually have an amazing insights where brands can actually look at what's happening in countries like Indonesia. So we actually show a very a big landscape of how the Indonesian market looks like, how the Vietnamese market look like, and how does the Singapore market looks like, and where is the top categories that each of these countries are producing in. What is the most popular? Is it in society and culture? And on top of that, what is then people listening to? What's the top active podcast? And that's within the Insight portal itself. And then for brands, actually, they can just basically create a campaign and immediately be able to kind of work with podcaster. And we make that match directly on the platform. It's through AI matching. There's an algorithm, sophisticated algorithm that we actually do to match podcaster. So you'll be very exciting for companies that's telling me, hey, I want to look for shows that is targeting marketing, topics in marketing, and your show would definitely be prime. So I'll definitely say, go and, join us on Matchcast, add yourself to it, and we would love to have you on the platform as well. And anyone else who is, producing a podcast in Southeast Asia that's actually looking at where I could go with my podcast and potentially get advertisers from, give it a go at Matchcast.
Is this your URL?
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm going to go check it out during my break. We have still a dozen of speakers coming up after you. So during the break time, the first thing I'll do is to basically sign up, for an account at matchcast.com. And before we let you go, just maybe to your point about the fact that these speakers, right, are really entering our homes and helping to elevate the demand for audio content, and how brand marketers can actually leverage on this trend and change in consumption patterns. So it's like I was just talking to a CMO on my show the other day. He was telling me that instead of building websites, which they have been doing for the past 10 years, they'll be building podcasts in the next 5 years. And I was telling them, you don't have to do the heavy lifting. Let the podcasters do it for you. They're really brilliant content for you, right? All you need to do is maybe leverage on a platform. And probably the next time when it comes on our show, I will recommend Matchcast to them, because that's where they can find the right content where, their brand, products, or services can really resonate with the audiences, where they actually come in collaboration with those podcast shows, content creators. So thank you so much again for coming on. And I'm not sure whether you already had your breakfast.
No. We should meet up for breakfast. It'll be on me. Yeah.
Well, I'm not stuck here doing this PodFest Asia thing, right? I'll probably, just log out and immediately drive to where you live and have breakfast with you together. Maybe have a nice nasi lemak breakfast together. But probably this time, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. Come by and thanks for having me, Wayne. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jamie. I'll see you very soon. Yeah. You take care. Keep yourself safe. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes. Evo Terra, how are you?
Ni hao.
Ni hao. I thought you were going to say Sawadee Cup.
Yeah, well, that one. I'm much better at my Thai than I am at my Mandarin, but at least I can say hi. Hi, Wayne. How are you?
I'm fantastic, and it's such a privilege and honor to talk to the veteran in the podcasting industry, a philosopher, not just a strategy. So something about, being philosophical about the things that you do, maybe like your life goals or even how you navigate life. I'm always very interested to talk to philosophers. So especially a philosopher who is representing this industry and who has been in this industry for a decade or even more, longer than me, because I'm new at this, and you're the best person to dish out great advice to someone like me. And thank you so much for agreeing to come on to this show.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm glad we were able to make the timing work. It would have been a lot easier if I still lived in Bangkok, but I don't. I've been back in America for a couple of years, but it all worked out for us, didn't it?
Yeah. Where exactly are you in right now? Phoenix, am I right?
Phoenix, Arizona. Yeah.
I overheard that during your industry review with Heather Osgood in an earlier live stream. So, Bangkok. So, can I maybe just touch on that? Is that a place or a city where you were doing your podcasting, or maybe something that you find a great, environment or the culture there inspires you to do even more great podcasting work during your time there?
Yeah. So when my wife and I spent all of 2015 traveling, we had what we like to call a shared midlife crisis. And in October, we found ourselves in Thailand, in Bangkok specifically, and someone there connected me with somebody else. Said, you need to meet this guy named Greg Jorgensen. And so Greg and I met for drinks and had some pizza, and that was it. We were just traveling through. It was just nice to meet people. He's a Canadian, lives in Bangkok, and we just had a conversation. Well, we wound up moving to Bangkok like 3 months later. My wife and I decided, let's see if we can make a go of living in Bangkok proper. So I reached out to Greg right away, and we met for coffee, and we're talking about it. And he mentioned that he used to be the host of the Bangkok podcast, but he had let the show lapse because his co-host went and moved to Japan at the time. And the funny thing was, Greg and I had never talked about podcasting. It wasn't podcasting that connected the two of us. It was just somebody thought that here's an American in Thailand, here's a Canadian in Thailand, you guys would get together. So Greg mentioned about the Bangkok podcast, and I said, so I know a little bit about this podcasting thing. Would you like a co-host and really start the show again? So that was it. So we relaunched the Bangkok podcast, and I was the co-host for 70-ish or so episodes, which was great to relaunch a show, bring it back, and kind of put some new life into it. It hadn't been live for 6 years, but there was still a real an audience that was still connected, that were still listening to the episodes. And so when we relaunched it, everybody loved it. It was an expat-focused show. It was all about life in Bangkok and the surrounding area if you happen to be an expat. And it was a big hit, and people loved it. And it was my first experience with doing local podcasting, and it was quite a treat. And I'm very happy to say that even after I left the show, when I moved back to America, another gentleman, Ed Knuth, joined the show, and they are still going strong. In fact, I think the show is better than it was before, because both of these guys are long-time expats. They got 20 years in the country. They're long-termers, and so it's great. So if you have any interest at all in Bangkok, you won't hear me on there any longer, but Greg and Ed do a great job at the Bangkok podcast.
This is fantastic, and I'm sure they definitely miss you. Even though their show is still going strong, but you are a great, speaker in terms of like how you philosophize about everything in general, especially in areas of podcasting. So I'm just glad there's a connection in terms of like you love the city, definitely, right? Bangkok. That actually inspired you to move there and do your podcasting work there for a period of time. Have you ever thought of actually moving back there and do more podcasts, for example, or educating people?
Yeah, definitely. I think, my wife and I really enjoyed our time abroad. The entire reason we moved back to America was because we were going to be, and we now are, grandparents. And so we have a 2.5-year-old granddaughter who's amazing, and that'll keep us here for a while. But still, we really enjoyed our time abroad. We loved traveling around, meeting different people. When we were in Bangkok, I met with a lot of the co-working facilities that were wanting to have a podcast studio built up. We started a local meetup of podcasters, mostly expat podcasters, but a handful of Thai podcasters there too. And podcast, the connections kind of got me around the world. As I mentioned, my wife and I were traveling, and we were going to Brussels in 2015, and I happened to see a Facebook comment. We were in Copenhagen at the time. I saw a guy in Brussels make a comment about wanting to meet up for coffee to talk about podcasting for his new startup. Well, we were going to travel to Brussels 2 days later, so never met this guy before. I replied to his Facebook comment that I know a little bit about podcasting and we'd be in town. Would he like to meet up for coffee? Within 20 minutes, Wayne, he had told me to cancel our hotel reservations. We would be staying with him for the 4 days we were going to be in Brussels, and we did. And it was amazing. So Cedar Ak, and I appreciate that. When we went to Spain, we spent 6 weeks in Spain, most of the time in the home of a woman who I'd known for years, a podcaster from the UK who lived in Spain now. She gave us the keys to her extra flat in Galicia. So we stayed for free, at this other home. So yeah. And when I was in Australia, I stayed for 2 months with somebody who I had met previously podcasting. So yeah, it's amazing how once you get into this, and when you've been doing it for 16 years like I have, you develop these connections with people all over the world. And when proximity works out, it works out, and you can really experience that together with them. It's great.
And this sense of belonging, community, and tribe, right, doesn't just exist in like music communities like the Grateful Dead, or maybe like the Tool fans, or the Nine Inch Nails fan, or even the Elton John fan communities.
Sure.
It's also very much alive and kicking in the podcasting community where everyone takes care of each other.
Yeah.
They share resources, knowledge like this, and of course network as well. So it's incredible to be part of this tribe and feeling that I belong. I always felt like I'm an outsider. So like when I actually discovered podcasting like a year ago, more than that actually, 2 years ago, when I actually started making shows, it was 2 years ago. But way before that was in 2008, I think, and I think you actually started way before that. Leo Laporte was one of my probably podcasting heroes. I think he was doing Back Break Weekly, and I was in Apple Retail at the time. So I was like listening to his podcast like religiously, every week. So, but I understand you actually went, or you actually started way ahead of him. And probably in 2004, that's where you got your start in podcasting industry, right? Tell us how you got into the space in the first place.
Yeah, I did. You're right. It started in 2004. But much like Leo Laporte, who you just mentioned, prior to podcasting, I had a radio show in America. And it was actually an internet radio show, which we were syndicating around the country and was on XM satellite radio. So for people like me who already had a show, we already had a following, it was just through internet radio, we already had a web presence. When podcasting came along, it was really simple for us because we didn't, all the awkwardness of what do you say into a microphone, we'd worked that out years ago. We were already doing everything. So when we began podcasting back in October of 2004, it was just a new distribution method. We really weren't doing anything new. We were just taking our radio show and shoving it through an RSS feed so that people could enjoy as well. But that quickly changed. In 2005, I got asked to write Podcasting for Dummies, and that really opened my eyes up to the wealth of content you can make within podcasting, where there is no clock. We're not trying to go against a certain format. We do what we want to do with the podcast. Some are more strict about following formats than others. But then it got into the radio show I was doing, we were interviewing science fiction authors. So I had met and made friends with a lot of authors. And this was back in the time, Wayne, before there was the Amazon Kindle. This is back when Amazon sold physical books. Ebooks were not a thing in 2004 and 2005. So I convinced many of these authors who were what I like to call underpublished. They couldn't get a big publisher interested in their books, and so they were just going to languish, in a drawer somewhere, or maybe they'd spend a lot of money on a vanity press and spend $1,500 to get a series of books. Just a bad idea. I convinced these people, well, look, why don't you just narrate your book one chapter at a time, and let's release it as a podcast. That was new. It had never been done, this podcasting in audiobooks form. So we started a website called podiobooks.com, which podcasting plus audiobooks. And it was great. We had like 700 titles. We were pushing down several million episodes a month of the content was being downloaded. And I'm very happy to say that while it was never meant to be a money-making venture for me, we gave these away for free. And we didn't charge the authors anything for the service. Many of the authors went on to have very lucrative careers as writers. Some got big publishing contracts. Some went on to write for film and TV. It was a fantastic experience that there was no other way to do this other than podcasting. That was the only way this could have been done. So I was thrilled to what we could do with podcasting. And really, that's what I see the future of podcasting is that this is a place for you to do and create content that just doesn't work anywhere else. It's its own format. It's its own idea. And there can be lots of formats within podcasting. So I encourage people, if you've got an interesting thing you want to try, a podcast might be a great way for you to let those creative wings stretch out a bit.
That's really great advice. I absolutely love that. I think it really resonates, and it's not unusual to hear many stories like this where podcasters, right, when it originally started out, it was like just something like a passion or a hobby, but they went on to get really good at content creation or being great at audio producing or other forms of the art. And of course, there's a science behind it as well. And I think just a couple of days ago, there's a new Netflix show which actually originates from a podcast. And the podcast creator was interviewing the singer or frontman of Nine Inch Nails, this industrial band. And basically, Trent Reznor, who's the frontman of the band, told him that, why don't you do this in a TV show like Netflix? So like 4 years later, it became a show on Netflix. And now he's able to interview even more musicians than just Nine Inch Nails. And basically took his show from a podcast form to a Netflix show. Do you see this as a natural progression, or in terms of how podcasters who are ambitious can actually aspire to become?
Yeah, I think it can be a natural progression. The thing you have to remember about podcasting is there's not a linear flow. There are lots of paths you can go down, but without a doubt, television studios, movie studios, they're all hungry for content. And before podcasting, a couple of years ago, really all they had to go off were books. Well, now you can take a book or a story or a script that you've written, and look, everybody and their dog, it seems like, has written a script or a book and they want to try something with. Now you can actually take that, if that's what you've done, and turn it into a podcast. Maybe you get 4 or 5 friends to act out the parts, or maybe if you really want to be serious about it, you flex that credit card and you pay people a decent wage to go create something interesting, or hire a production firm to do something and really demonstrate to a studio what this can be, how this vision might take shape. Yeah, I think lots of studios are looking at those. We just found out recently, Amazon is rumored to be interested in buying Wondery, the big content production company out of LA. And it makes perfect sense to me because Amazon already has Amazon Studios that makes TV and film for the Amazon Prime ecosystem, as well as for theatrical and television release as well. Well, now they've got, if they do buy Wondery, now they've got an established team that knows how to make compelling content people want to listen to. Millions of people listen to Wondery content. So now they could use that as a test bed. Not every podcast is going to make a great movie or a television show, but many of them will. But I think the reverse is true also, Wayne. I think these studios will look at some of these scripts and some of these stories and go, we don't quite see it as a TV show, but that's fine. Now we've got a podcast production company. Let's invest a lot of money, not as much money as a TV or film, but let's invest a lot so we can make a really compelling podcast. It's just another distribution channel for them as well. It's a way for Amazon to keep building great content, but in the format people want to consume it. That's what's got me the most excited.
And I'm definitely getting excited even with this whispering, of news of acquisition of all this podcast content houses. So it's a very positive, outlook for the future. And we know that basically on the back of your palm, massive changes that are happening to this medium, right? And you know exactly where podcasting is headed. So to a lot of people, and I read, on your LinkedIn as well, people will post, about what they felt about you. They endorse you for your great mentorship and your teachings, and of course some of the great things you have done in the industry. You're like a great blend of the in the trenches experience and big picture understanding. So I definitely don't want to waste this opportunity to ask you in terms of the future, right? Fresh from pontificating about ups and downs of this year, 2020, and how this year has already affected podcast industry, right? Yeah. So can I maybe get you to remix what you just told Heather in an earlier live stream, to our PodFest Asia audience, your hot take, and educate us, in terms of like this time on what the future actually holds for everyone in the podcasting industry.
Right. Well, this year has definitely been, 2020 has been a lot of things, many of them terrible. I think the entire world can agree with, but it's also been great for a lot of aspects. You could clearly say that 2020 was the year of podcasting. We've had more shows now developed this year than ever before. I mean, there's something like, what is it, 100,000 or some number like that. Something like 100,000 new shows are added to Apple Podcasts every single month. Mind-blowing. It's a mind-blowing number of how much new content is being created. So yeah, you could say 2020 is the year of podcasting. But here's the deal. I think you can say 2021 will also be the year of podcasting, and 2022, because there's all of this interest from the outside is now continuing to look at podcasting. It never really went away, but now as more people are adopting it and grabbing it, and now that it's baked into every single listening app we have, Spotify has podcasting, Pandora has podcasting, Amazon Music has podcasting, Audible has podcasting. Nobody has to get a specialized listening app any longer. Now it's just, it's in here, right? Whatever this device is, we all carry around with us the ability to listen to content, which is great. More people than ever before are now discovering what podcasting is. And also, if you look at the crazy acquisitions that have been taking place since 2018, mostly by our friends at Spotify, but also, SiriusXM came in and made a big purchase. iHeartRadio is doing lots of acquisitions. There's a lot of things happening which I think are a good and bad mix. I think as these acquisitions happen, the people that are spending lots of money, like millions of dollars on this, they're looking to curate and build amazing content, which just elevates all of our games. That's helpful. I don't like the idea, and I don't think it's going to happen, to where everybody's going to be forced to listen to podcasts in Spotify. I think we're naturally going to have a fracturing of content. Just like, look, if you want to watch The Umbrella Academy, your only option is really to get a Netflix subscription, right? But if you want to watch Truth Seekers, another great show I'm in the middle of right now, that happens to be on Amazon Prime. But we're used to doing that. I mean, as consumers of content, we're used to turning the channel and switching to where we want to be. So I know a lot of my fellow podcasting pundits will decry this idea of exclusivity that's happening when certain shows are no longer available everywhere. And I certainly understand to a certain degree. I, too, miss the ubiquity of just knowing that I can fire up whatever my podcast listening app of choice is and getting anything. But that was a free ride we had for a while. And maybe it doesn't exist anymore. But the good news is nothing's really locked up. Or I should say, most things aren't locked up. Luminary locked up content. If you didn't pay your $5 a month, you wouldn't get it. But if your favorite podcast goes to Spotify as an exclusive show, and you don't have a Spotify membership, you can still listen. You just have to pay for it with ads, which we're used to doing anyhow, right? I don't really see that as a big problem. So to predict the future, I see more of that consolidation happening. But I also see a lot more interesting, very cool content coming out of this, especially as these podcast listening platforms are buying these big podcast production houses. I think you'll see that investment really start to pay off in some amazing content, which will still leave plenty of room for independent creators. There's still plenty of room out there in podcasting, and there will always be plenty of room for people who've got an interesting idea, a story to tell, a thing to see. There's still a platform for that. And I think it's great that people will get to pick and choose what they want to listen to. The really, really big, high-end quality production, or just the cool thing where two dudes just sitting around, having a beer and chatting about it. It all can exist, just like most digital content can exist side by side.
This is fantastic, and I love to hear you riff, about this topic, and how I wish, we could give you another 2 hours, to talk about this subject topic. But before we let you go, we have to talk about, to your point about how you will be consolidated and how you have to go to specific channels to get the content that we love, like this Joe Rogan thing, right? I understand it has already been pulled out from YouTube. We no longer are able to get his shows on YouTube anymore. So that means that, just sitting on my couch and watching YouTube replays of Joe Rogan experience shows or new episodes are no longer possible. So right. Do you think that he will actually alienate his fans who are basically, prefer to watch him on YouTube and basically having to switch to Spotify, even though it's free? Mm-hmm. It's supported by ads, obviously. At this time, will it actually, spoil the experience for the fans who used to consume it in a certain way for them?
I think for for some of them, they will feel that happened. But one thing that I've seen happen over and over again is, even though we complain about things as listeners, as viewers, as users, we adapt pretty quickly. We're a rather resilient species. And so when the thing that we've had our normal way goes away, but it's still available in a different form, we tend to, we grouse about it a lot. We'll complain, we'll scream, we'll start, nasty Twitter fights, but eventually we'll move over. The hardcore fans will move over, that's for sure. Now, will he lose audience? Probably, but I don't know that that's really a big deal. I'm reminded of about 10 years or so ago, there was a service that I can't even think of the name of it anymore, and it was a membership site, and it was a free membership site that you could use. And if you wanted to use it, here it was totally free. They had an upgrade version, but it was totally and completely free. Well, I was using it for podiobooks.com. We were using that as our community space. And then after about 3 years, the company said, you know what, we're losing money on this free tier, so we're going to have the free tier go away. It's just going to disappear, and you've got 3 months to deal with it. You either upgrade, and it wasn't a cheap upgrade. It was like $150 a month or something, pretty significant for free to that big of a deal. And they took it away. I happened to be sitting next to the chief marketing officer for this company a month later. We were going to South by Southwest. Just randomly sit down next to this guy who started talking. He tells me the company's with. So I said, what happened? Did you lose like 1 million? Because I'd already known the numbers. I knew that they lost like 1 million accounts as soon as they did that. And he said, no, we didn't lose 1 million accounts. We gained 30,000 paying customers. I went, oh, that's an interesting way to look at this. Yeah, you did lose the free stuff that didn't give you any revenue whatsoever, but they made, suddenly all the revenue came in for the rest of them. So I think it's a similar situation when we look at these things that get locked up. No, you can't do that free thing you could do anymore. So for you, it's a negative, but and maybe it's a negative for the host of the show, but then now the owner of the content says, well, what did I get? So maybe I lose a few million listeners or watchers of this particular show, depending if it's YouTube or whatever. But are they going to pick up 30,000 more people who pay for Spotify Premium? That's a win as far as they're concerned. So lots of parties that are involved in these conversations.
And it's definitely exciting for those aspiring, ambitious podcasters who are willing to do the reps and to continuously do this, not just for 3 months, but for 3 years, 10 years, right, 30 years down the road. I think they all aspire to be a Joe Rogan, right, in the making. And many are actually entering the industry and expecting to take off or lift off, just like Joe Rogan. But they didn't realize that it took him 10 years of continuously doing podcasting and perfecting his art to be where he's at today. Yeah? What do you actually know about?
But let's also be honest, right? Joe Rogan was successful at podcasting, but before Joe Rogan was a podcaster, he was Joe Rogan, right? I mean, he was a celebrity. He had millions of people who knew his name immediately. So far too many would-be podcasters look at these celebrities who found podcasting success and say, all I got to do is put the time in. Like, no, that's not what you have to do. What you have to do is become a celebrity first. That's really what podcasting is. The smartest thing that you can do if you really want to build a big platform in podcasting is build a big platform first, and then make a podcast that big platform, that audience wants. If you start from scratch, it's going to be a long haul. And many of us do start from scratch. Lots of people start from scratch and can break in and get big. But yeah, just keep in mind that you can follow a celebrity's advice only so far. They were celebrities first. And if you're not, you're probably not gonna follow their path too quickly.
What do you tell podcaster beginners who are getting like less than 100 downloads and basically telling agencies to help me to find an advertiser for my show?
Well, I would teach them some math, because that's not going to work. Agencies don't want to talk to you until you have 50 or 60,000 downloads an episode. And that's when it starts to become viable for you as a business. So what I always tell podcasters is this: look, podcasts tend to get the audience they deserve. And if you want to grow your audience, invest in your show. Make it the best quality content that you possibly can. You can't just do it kind of half-assed. You really have to be serious about it. And then also invest wisely. Once you start to get traction, there are effective ways you can use paid-for marketing to really grow your show. But you've got to be smart about it. Keep in mind, most podcasts don't get much more than 100 or so downloads per episode. That's the average number, which of course means, because it's an average, I'm pretty decent at math, that means half the shows out there get less than that, and half the shows out there get a lot more than that. But again, podcasters tend to get the audience they deserve. The more effort you really put into something and are doing a great job at it, it'll probably pay off. It just might take you, as you said a moment ago, 10 years before you reach the kind of audience numbers to where advertising becomes a viable model. For 99.9% of the podcasts, advertising is not a viable revenue source. So find something else to do with your podcast other than hope it's going to be a money tree for you, because it probably won't be.
Perfect advice. And we know that you also led many good teams, good people who do good work in many of your stints in other companies previously. So we understand that you have already embraced the web when it was young, and you have even dragged like multi-billion-dollar companies along with you as they kick and scream all the way to the bank, right? So you're among like the first dozens of podcasters where they are now like nearly 1 million. So seeing the transition and the development of the industry, seeing how tech has changed, how the podcasting industry has changed, what's your biggest, most dramatic impact you have seen since you started out in your career?
Yeah, I think it is the speed at which these advancements come at us. It's almost like Moore's law continues, as it will, because things are changing so fast all the time. And the thing to remember is, sure, I've got 16 years of experience in podcasting and a couple of dozen years in just being a technology and digital strategy advisor. But most of the information that I've gleaned over those years is worthless today in 2020. None of it, I shouldn't say none of it, but a good portion of it is now outdated. So I always keep my eye on what the new things happening in the new crop of people. If you would have asked me to predict something like TikTok 10 years ago, I would have laughed you out of the room. There's no way that's going to be the thing it is. Well, clearly I was wrong I would have been wrong had I made that prediction. So the thing about predicting the future and learning lessons is, yes, learn lessons from the past, but be very open to what you see in the future. And we just can't discount things because they don't make any sense to us. I had to have my kid explain Snapchat to me because I didn't get it. Right? I'm an old man. Of course I didn't get Snapchat. This was, 5 years ago. But always keep an eye and keep connected to the new people. Keep connected to what's really happening, because we cannot predict this stuff. It is such a drastic change. The speed of advancement is getting so fast right now. We just don't get how it's going to change. I don't know. What happens when we no longer carry these things in our hand because now it's all stuck inside of our head? What happens when we all have, these implants in our eyes that are beaming stuff straight into us that we can see and nobody else can see? I don't know. It sounds science fiction-y. But again, if you would have asked Evo 20 years ago if we would carry a supercomputer in his pocket, he would have told you you're an insane person. But here we are. So yeah, that's the reality. Things change so fast. We've got to look to the future as much as we learn lessons from the past.
Fantastic. And it's interesting you mentioned about TikTok, because we know that 15 or 13-second TikTok video takes tons of effort to produce, right?
Yeah.
So it's perfectly linked to my next question, my last question, in fact, before we let you go, about microcasts. What's your opinion about microcasts that are less than 10 minutes long?
Well, hey, my show, Podcast Pontification, is always less than 10 minutes long, and I do it 4 days a week. That is, and to me, always has been an interesting model, a new way, not really a new way, but an innovative way to get content out there. Look, we're approaching 2 million podcasts. People don't have while we have a lot of time in our schedules, we only have 24 hours in the day. So the tighter you can make content, the better you will make content. Your people will be much more likely to listen to what you have to say when you really narrow that focus down. Sure, Joe Rogan can go for 4.5 hours. Dan Carlin can go for 4.5 hours when he's doing hardcore history. That's great and fine. But you are not Dan Carlin. You're not Joe Rogan. If you can make that thing tighter, it's a whole lot better. And there's a wild world of people out there who've got just a little bit of time in their day to consume content. Why not make content for that time slice as well?
Fantastic. I think this is a great way to close up this particular session. And you've been a great person to talk to about podcasting, and it has been an effortless, way to do a festival, together with you, because you have so many interesting stories to tell. So we really hope to invite you back, hopefully, for our in-person event in Asia, in this part of the world, in Singapore, very soon. And I really hope to see you back here in Asia. Maybe after that, we can take another trip to Bangkok together, maybe to watch 9 Inch Nails perform in Bangkok again.
That sounds fantastic.
Just to play, yeah.
Oh, that sounds fantastic, Wayne.
Really looking forward to that. So keep yourself safe and take care of each other. Take care of your partner next to you. What's her name?
I will. That's Sheila over there. I will. Yeah, there you go. There's
Hi,
the face
Sheila.
on the cameras.
Nice meeting you.
All right, Wayne. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference, okay?
Thank you so much, sir. See ya, Evo.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Evo Terra, podcast strategist and philosopher. And that brings to a close to the first round of our PodFest Asia virtual summit event. So it's like a kind of, should I say, one after another, inviting really great speakers and experts in the industry to come on and interact with us, and maybe to communicate, and basically educate us as well on the knowledge that they have attained, being in the industries for so long. And there's so many things to learn, and I've learned a great ton already today in this short 2 hours live stream. And this is also an opportunity for me to say hello to those who are replaying this on their smart speakers or on their AirPods when they go out for strolls or for their jogs. Thank you so much for listening in. And I really appreciate you for attending and listening into this particular conference. And we have a long way to go yet, because I'm going to just take a 2-hour break and have my breakfast. It's 8 a.m. right here in Singapore. I was streaming before the sunrise. Now the sun is right in front of my eyes, and it's time for me to maybe grab some breakfast. I will be resuming after lunch. We have a ton, I think a dozen more great speakers coming on. They are all great leaders in our field. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And I'll also post up our day 2 link for you to sign up to also attend this. Especially if you're on LinkedIn, right? Make sure you sign up and to get the link so they can tune in live on LinkedIn as well. So I'm going to check out for now, and I'll see you guys really soon. So take care and goodbye.